And this month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Super Inframan, Allison Cook, and Eric Hervin. Thank you all so very much for your incredible support.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have joining me again Mr. Lee Adams. How you doing, Lee?
Good. Just glad to be back on your show with you.
So the first time you were on, we talked about your book on lucid dreaming, which is called what?
Visionary Guidebook to Lucid Dreaming.
And it wasn't out yet at the time, but it is out now.
Yes, yeah. You can get it off the demon website, Amazon.com. Just kidding. You can get off of there, or you can go to luciddreambook.com and you can get it from there. And if you do, off my main website, you get a signed copy, so it's kind of a little beneficial there.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that's published by Inner Traditions too.
Yes, correct. Yep.
So that's
cool.
that's significant to me. I really like Inner Traditions stuff.
Yeah, they're really good at supporting their authors. Highly recommend anybody that's writing a book or anything like that, go through them. They really do a lot of work to improve your book and also market it. So very good people, never had a problem with them, and they support a lot of podcasters and stuff like that too. So
yeah, I communicate with them regularly, and they're always looking to get me appropriate stuff for the show.
Awesome.
So, and one of the things we didn't talk about, I don't think we talked about some of your personal experiences, because we talked about lucid dreaming in general and things like that. But I know you've had some UFO encounters.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, UFOs are pretty hot topic right now, I think, in at least America, maybe Israel. So, you know, I have a background in the military. I spent 14 years in the Navy. I was on the Nimitz, not the same time that the UFO Nimitz encounters happened or anything like that, but I definitely know that ship very well, and I know military aviation pretty good. But prior to me joining, and I've had an encounter while I was in the military, so I'd love to tell you about that one. But my first encounter was at a young age. I was really into space at the time, and I went to space camp and I met a friend there that lived in Oregon, and I lived in Idaho, and we got along pretty good. So after the camp was done, I suggested that he come visit me for the following summer, and he ended up visiting me. And so we spent a lot of time outside, you know, at night, watching the night sky and stuff. And so I'm out, you know, we stayed out all summer, essentially, a couple months of it, and just slept under the stars, and kind of romantic, you know. Just kidding. But it was a late night, and I was looking up, you know, as I normally do, and I had this idea in my mind first, before I saw anything, of a plane, like a 737 or whatever, coming in to land, and it hit my house. And that was kind of the vision I had in my mind, you know, like this semi-dream state, you know, hypnagogic kind of like daydreaming vision, you know. And so that was kind of playing in my mind, and I didn't really think anything of it, you know, just like any kid, you know. And suddenly in the distance, I see a light, and I live pretty close to an airport, and that's obviously why I was thinking about a 737 hitting my house. Right. And so I didn't really think anything of the light, you know, in the distance. It usually happens at night, and they're primarily like earlier in the night, because it was probably around like 1 or 2 in the morning, and most airplanes are landed by then, but I didn't really think anything of that either. But I see this light in the distance, and it comes closer to me, and I wasn't worried or anything. And it keeps coming closer and closer and closer. And eventually, I kind of got worried because it was very bright at this point. It was definitely not a star. And it was kind of atypical of an aircraft to be this close to my house. And I kind of live like in the farmland, at the time. It's like the outskirts of Meridian, Idaho. And so I'm just watching this light, and it's getting closer and closer still even. And then I'm thinking of my daydream about this plane hitting my house, and I'm really actually getting worried now. And, I'm sitting there thinking, should I run inside and tell my parents, like warn them that I had this idea of a plane hitting my house and now something's happening. And I was terrified, actually, to the point that I couldn't move. I felt like kind of paralyzed of fear. And suddenly, as I'm watching this light, it stops moving. It doesn't come any closer. And so I thought, well, maybe it's a helicopter, that they come by that area pretty often too. But I didn't hear any noise or anything like that. And in a couple seconds from it stopped moving, it sat still, and then it shot straight up in the sky, faster than I've ever seen any object fly. And prior to going to space camp, I happened to get the chance to see a space shuttle take off from Cape Canaveral in Florida.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it was an amazing, experience to see. One, if anybody's ever seen it or hasn't, it really looks like kind of like an upside down candle going into the sky. Like that's what a space shuttle looks like when it takes off. And you see this candle like, object fly, and then it eventually gets so high that it starts curving over the horizon and falling off into the distance. Like it doesn't, I thought if a space shuttle takes off, it goes up and then eventually disappears.
Right.
But that's not what happens. You actually see it drop over the horizon, and then it's gone. And so, I knew what that looked like. And so fast forward, I'm watching this object shoot up straight in the sky, and I see it, and it goes so high, so quickly, in a matter of a couple seconds, and it goes and it dips over the horizon. And it did what the space shuttle did, when I saw it previously. And so I'm just dumbstruck. I'm just sitting there. I don't know what to say. I probably hallucinated at this point. That's what I'm thinking. And I'm never going to tell another soul about this, And so I'm sitting there. I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do about this. And my friend, who I thought was asleep, he says, "What the F was that?" And I'm like, dude, I have no idea. And so we just chatted, we're super excited at what we just experienced. And, the next day I go and tell my mom what I saw and stuff. And she's like, whatever, no big deal. You're just like, we were probably like 13, 14 at the time or something like that, and who knows what my mom thought we thought we saw or whatever.
Right.
And so, over the years, I kind of have returned to that memory many times. And really at the time and through my life, my younger years, that experience kind of went out the window, especially after me and my friend kind of stopped talking years later. Friendships kind of depart from each other.
Yeah.
But I kept returning to it later in life, and thinking about it. And one thing that came to mind is I never heard any supersonic, sounds or anything like that from it breaking the sound barrier. Because of the speed it would go out, it would definitely have broken the sound barrier. It made no sound when it moved, like a normal helicopter would.
Right.
It was faster than any other aircraft or helicopter that I could see. It also, I've seen since then meteors and meteorites, not a meteor,
right,
come into the atmosphere and burn up. Essentially you get that tail, the long string tail off of it in a fire. Definitely did not look like that. It was a single point object, and when it left the atmosphere, it didn't burn or anything like that. So it didn't show any tail. So it wasn't a meteorite. And So, I really don't know what it was, because it kind of breaks all these typical laws, of like sound and speed and, the typical forms that you would see from objects coming into the atmosphere and stuff.
Did you have any indication that that there was anything there other than just the light?
No. It was just a point in the sky. It when it got closer, it definitely got brighter.
Yeah.
But it was only one light. So, more recently, I thought, well, maybe it was like some type of plasma ball or something like that.
Right.
But typically, we don't think plasma can just shift directions spontaneously and kind of have or stop midair. Those are pretty atypical actions of a unconscious being.
Well, maybe
craft,
maybe they're not unconscious. I mean, the idea of plasma intelligence is not that far-fetched.
Right, and that's what I've come to kind of maybe realize is that maybe, obviously I have no proof of this whatsoever, besides maybe other people do that I haven't read about, but my newest idea, essentially, of my own experience is that maybe it is some type of plasma ball, and it has consciousness of some kind, and it can control its movement through our space, I definitely think that's probably the most likely explanation to my experience with that object. And then later in life,
before we move away from that, do you think that you envisioning the plane crashing to the house was either a sort of precognitive of that event of seeing the light, or possibly even summoned the light?
Right. Yeah, I've definitely have thought about that a lot too. Like, what did my imagination have to do with that? And why did I remember the airplane coming into my house prior to the object? Like, why is that important to me? What I've come to realize, later life, is that symbolically, it's very possible that these objects could in some way try to communicate through symbols, and those symbols don't necessarily translate very well into English or the mind of a 14-year-old. And so what me seeing as an airplane hitting my house could have very well been some type of way of trying to communicate to me symbolically, and me just not really getting the message the way that it was intended.
The translation didn't come through right.
Yeah, exactly. I was playing telephone, and I'm way on the end,
Well, I mean, if we're dealing with something that is truly alien to us, and I don't mean alien like necessarily extraterrestrial, but how easy is it for us to communicate with even cats and dogs that we live with and have some common ground with, much less something that we don't even understand what it is, and vice versa. It may not understand what we are.
Right, exactly. It may be just, maybe the images that I experienced weren't even remotely close to what it was trying to communicate to me.
Right.
And it just, because of how my brain is and structured and how it interprets the information, that was the most logical, images that my mind could grasp onto and translate. Say you intensely focus electromagnetic fields through somebody's brain, they can hallucinate senses, sense of other being or something like that in the area. And it doesn't necessarily mean that another being is actually in the area. It's just it could be the interpretation of those waves in the brain, and they're firing in such a way that it tries to make sense of the information that it's interpreting, because we normally maybe interpret electromagnetic waves in such ways, and it just kind of generates a incomplete image of what actually is occurring. So an airplane and running to my house, could mean a lot of different things to me, but it also could very well be completely unrelated in the sense that I just don't understand what what they're trying to say, if anything.
Well, maybe they just wanted to make sure you looked up, and the way that your brain interpreted that is, there's an airplane going to crash into my house.
Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, we have something important to show you, and this is one way to really get your attention. I reached out to my friend pretty recently, a few times, and we didn't really communicate for years, and so over the years, my memory of the encounter has changed, and I should have wrote it down in a journal so I could review it, years later. But I wanted to verify, I was like, maybe my story is like changing, and I'm not realizing it. So I went back and emailed him. I found him, and I was like, hey, this is what I kind of remember. What do you remember? He was very like awkward, like weird about it. Very short in his response, and he said that was the most influential experience he's ever had in his entire life.
Wow. But
then he didn't want to talk about it at all. And so I waited a couple years, and I wrote him back again, asking if he remembered anything more or any details or anything like that. And he was very quick to respond and essentially said he didn't really want to talk about it. I don't know what that means. But if I had, I did, I think it's one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in reality, and, like this. And, I'd want to talk to somebody about it, and find out what they remember. But he was very standoffish. Maybe it was a relationship issue with him and I just don't really remember or something, but I found it kind of odd,
It could also be that whatever that was shook up his view of reality, and he didn't want it to.
Right.
So, yes, it's profound to him, but he doesn't want to think about it because it's going to unnerve, what may be a more solid view of reality that he currently holds, Because you find that with people where they don't want to even think about it.
Right. Yeah. There's this absolute kind of denial, that can happen, with people. And I get that, it's like protecting themselves from encountering that, and maybe they're just not ready to encounter something like that. And maybe the intention was for me to see it, if there is an intention behind it.
Right.
I really don't know, but I do know that, at the time of my life that I saw that, I was very interested in UFOs prior to experiencing that. And I also, it definitely continued my exploration into the subject later on in life, so it wasn't like, it didn't do anything to me. It definitely kind of rocked my world and opened my eyes a little bit to the what ifs and reality,
Yeah. And some people don't want that. I mean, that's the thing.
Right.
I've met, people who consider themselves skeptics. Very quickly, I'll realize that they're not skeptics. They fully believe that this stuff can't exist because it challenges their view of reality. So they will find any excuse to dismiss it, no matter how flimsy, because it terrifies them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in like esoteric works and stuff like that, there's a reason why a lot of the works is hidden, in secret, and they stay it's secret because not everyone's kind of ready to experience the deeper aspects of, the drama of reality.
Yeah.
And because people will lose their minds, and so not everyone's ready to lose their minds and then try to put it back together again. And I understand that.
Was it Israel Regarde who said that anyone pursuing magical practice should go through psychotherapy first?
Probably. I don't know, but I should have probably took that warning beforehand.
Well, when you think about it, I mean, that's what it does. Magic essentially makes you confront yourself,
Right.
And so if you're someone who isn't, everyone thinks they're stable generally. Mm-hmm. But if there's a lot of stuff under the surface you're not dealing with, that's going to come up when you start practicing magic. So, going through psychotherapy first would be a good way to get that stuff out in the open, so it doesn't surprise you when you start delving into these deeper states of consciousness.
Definitely, yeah. In a way, I think the UFO symbology is kind of related to what you're saying, is essentially kind of like a knocking at the door, of saying, hey, here's something abnormal to your own, the common aspect of reality that everyone thinks that happens. And here's an encounter. What do you do with that? It's kind of waking you up to say, oh, there's a lot more going on here than I thought.
Yeah.
And that can be very ungrounding and disorienting. And, at the time I would say that I wasn't ready for that. And though it was in my mind a lot, growing up and even now, oftentimes I found those things are kind of ignored even for myself, because it's hard to communicate that to people that haven't had those experiences too. You can't really relate to people. You say something and they kind of blow it off or whatever.
Right.
The interesting thing about this experience, that one particularly, is that later on, years later after I had joined the military, I won't tell you the second experience right now. I'm still talking about the first. I went to a niece's graduation party, and my uncle, who's a very A-type personality, he's kind of the person that we would describe as like doesn't really want to encounter any of this stuff because it might shatter his reality. Mm-hmm. He started. I was kind of overhearing a conversation he was having with some other people, and he described a similar experience in near where I had mine, where he was driving into Boise, Idaho, which is pretty close to Meridian, and essentially a plasma, ball-like light flew over his car and then shot up straight in the sky and then went into space. That's how he described it. And I've never told him about my experience ever. I never would, because he's not the type of person that I think would consider it or even listen to me. You think I was insane. But here I am, probably like 10 years later, hearing my uncle tell me very similar story about his experiences with a similar light, plasma like thing or something, doing the similar things that in a very similar location too, so it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is it may, part of the reason you were able to experience it might have been where you were. The location may have been part of it.
Definitely.
There could be a genetic factor. You're related to him, so you may be predisposed to, actually experience this stuff or interact with it. So, right time, right place, right genetic makeup, who knows?
Yeah.
I think all this stuff kind of forms a web. Like, I think when certain things click into place, you're more likely to have an experience, but it's not any one thing, And I don't think it's random. Yeah. I don't think it's random at all. I think that these things happen for a reason, and I find so many similarities between like shamanistic practices and what people go through when they have, extraordinary type experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Later, I'd say like probably 5-6 years after my uncle telling me that story, I managed to kind of visit him and have a deep conversation about other subjects related to sleep and dreams. And I found out, he's a lot like me. He has hypnagogia, he has sleep paralysis, and he has lucid dreams. He just never really talked to anybody about them. So we definitely have a similar neural makeup, allowing us to kind of experience those things, which the rest of my family really doesn't. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. And then, you throw in the UFO thing, it kind of starts coming together a little bit. You're like, oh, okay, maybe, like you said, the chemistry, the neural makeup, the genetics that we both have, allows us to kind of interact with these experiences where other people can't,
Yeah, or not as easily anyway.
Right, exactly.
Or they may have had a completely different experience if they were in that same location.
Right, yeah. It's hard to say, like, I wish I could sit down with my friend, that had the experience with me and really go through and say, well, what did you see? What did you see? Did you see anything before? Did you have any type of like idea floating in your head or image or anything like that?
Yeah.
And really kind of narrow it down to see what is going on there. But it's, it's complicated when somebody won't tell you, about that stuff. So I can't really relate to anybody on that level,
Right.
at least for that one experience.
Yeah, that's
And
unfortunate.
it'd be interesting to, maybe it's something I'll do in the future, is talk to my uncle if I get the chance to kind of ask him about that experience, and say, were you driving the car and thinking of anything or imagining anything or anything like that,
Yeah. Did anything pop into your head right before you saw it?
Right. I mean, you to be frank, like UFOs and aliens and stuff hasn't really been in my radar for a long time. And even with my 2 encounters, I kind of just was like, what do I do with that? I don't know. And these are all prior to me really getting deep into symbology and lucid dreaming, things like that. So I didn't really take much interest in it. And then kind of my focus went into dreams. And so I kind of ignored these semi, altered state experiences with UFOs most of my life. And I couldn't really get the connection to that. And even like when I was studying Jung at Pacifica, they kind of touched on this UFO as a modern myth idea, but I don't think they really even knew what to do with it themselves, because it was kind of so strange for Jung to kind of imply that to me. And so I really didn't even get to explore that aspect of Jung work, like dealing with the UFO symbology. And so it's kind of more of a recent thing in the last 6 months or so that I've kind of been like, okay, maybe I need to go back and touch on that again and encounter it again in my mind, So I've been definitely reviewing my experiences in sleep, dealing with like aliens and stuff like that, and saying, well, what does that mean?
Right.
And also, people obviously are very interested in UFOs and stuff like that. So podcast people like yourself have asked me about my encounters, and it obviously brings up a lot,
Yeah.
So it's good to be reminded.
So your second experience, that's the only other one, is the second one?
Yeah. So then I, joined the military, and everything was normal for quite a long time. I was probably in for about 6 years at the time, and I was in Virginia at Oceana, which is a giant F-18 military base. It's one of the biggest in the country, and it's New Year's Eve, and it's also flooded that night, and I work nights, so it's literally 1, 2 in the morning. It flooded the base. I had to take my boots off to walk through like knee-high water to even get to the flight line where all the planes are. Wow. And so the base is just completely black, shut down. There's some lights like shining up, and that's normal. They have them on all the time. But even the airfield is completely blank, like blacked out. No one's in the tower or anything like that. It's all that's all normal besides like the flooding and stuff. And so, I literally get to work, and I'm expecting no one to be there because it's so chaotic just to even get to work. It's such a struggle, but everyone's still there. So I'm like, oh great, here we go. So I have to work, and I go inside to get some tools for the aircrafts, because I was a maintainer, and I come out, and probably like, to be honest, like 5 or 6 people are probably like out there yelling to me about some aircraft they saw. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, dude, we saw an airplane fly over. It didn't have FAA lights on. So it's like atypical, it's completely illegal to fly anything like that.
Right.
First off, especially over a military base.
Right.
And then it goes and it lands in the trees. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, it went, and we saw it actually come down and land in the trees next to the base. And I'm like, well, there's nothing over there. And they're like, yeah, we know. Most of these guys are like, some of them are civilian aircraft pilots, so they fly like 737s commercial for the civilian side. I was a FTS, it's called full-time support. So I'm full active duty, but I work with reservists at that place. So some people are reservists. Mm-hmm. And so that they have a civilian life. I didn't. And then all their other people are like crew chiefs, which means like they're not pilots, but they fly with the plane as kind of like a backup, and they run like the systems and the radios and stuff like that for the aircraft, because it's a decently sized aircraft that we worked on. And so they're called crew chiefs, and they kind of take care of all that stuff. But they definitely know navigation. They know the airport layout, because they have to help with landing and things like that and navigation. And so they know what the airport looks like, and they know that there's no other airport there. And you can do a Google search of that base, and you can see that there's no other airline or airstrip. So this plane literally landed in the trees somehow, and I didn't see it. So I was like, I don't know what to do with that, and no one did. So we finished our work and we were heading on out. And one guy, he's sitting there talking to me about it. And I'm like, I didn't see it, dude. I don't know. And the gate guard, because we have to walk through a gate guard to go into the flight line. And he's like, oh, yeah, I saw that too. He's kind of listening to our conversation. And I'm like, oh, cool, dude. And, I don't really think much of it. And then he's like, he points up in the sky. He goes, what the F is that? And I was like, I look up and I see this thing. I describe it as like a giant trash bag, but it was essentially so large that it covered the majority of the base, and it was slowly moving over the base.
Oh, wow.
And it was semi-translucent, because I could see the clouds like coming in, and like it was moving in and out of the clouds. It was kind of like a low cloud, maybe like 1,000 feet up or so, cloud line. And you could see like the lights bouncing off the clouds, but then you'd see this object coming in and out of the clouds, and the light would bounce off of it. But it was kind of like the same texture as like you would see, what is it called? Like a jellyfish,
Oh, okay.
like that
All right.
semi-translucent looking jellyfish, look to it.
Yeah.
And it just hovering over the base, slowly moving, and I was just watching it, and there's three of us just sitting there staring at this thing, and I don't know what to do with that. No one did. We were just watching it, and I don't, it's like, well, we just kind of were just stuck, we're like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what to do, and we watched it probably for like a good 10 minutes or so. And then it eventually kind of just moved past the base, and I got in my car and I drove home, and we never really talked about it ever since. Like, I don't remember even bringing it up in a conversation with anybody at work after that. It was kind of just like, we didn't know what to do with it in our brains. So we just kind of ignored it, and it went away, and that was it. And, I still today don't know what to do with that, but one thing is for sure, it wasn't a plasma ball,
Right.
And it wasn't an aircraft, a typical normal aircraft that we see. It wasn't a drone, because it was massive, so massive that like no one would build that, Like, I don't even know what the purpose of that thing would be if it was a drone, besides being a giant target,
Well, there have been a lot of UFO sightings where people say that they feel like they're looking at something organic. I mean, did it feel that way to you?
Yeah, I mean, it looked organic. Yeah, I'd say I couldn't see the edges because they were in the cloud. Like,
right.
It came in and out of the cloud, and so that's why I say it looked kind of like a giant trash bag. Because it kind of like maybe morphed and bent or something. I don't know. It didn't look. I've never seen anything like it since, or before.
Yeah.
And so my brain literally can't compute what I saw. And I may remember one person. I've been trying to reach out to him to say, hey, do you remember that? But he hasn't responded to me, so I can't really get another picture in my mind, of somebody else saying, yeah, I saw the same thing again, because it's been a long time again,
Yeah.
So and I didn't write it down,
Right.
Could take pictures, because the freaking cell phones at the time were flip phones, with the biggest camera resolution you could ever have in your life.
Right.
So it's like, good luck, So, but it's strange that people saw an airplane like object prior to that thing too. And
yes,
and I'm like, okay, like what is going on?
and
like why is it near a military base? Why did the thing land in the trees? Why is there a giant like trash bag looking thing over the base? Like what is going on here?
Well,
and no one's had good answers. So
John Keel had commented on numerous cases where people would see, say, an airplane, except it wasn't moving like an airplane. It wasn't making any sound. It was gliding really slowly and close to the ground. Like it was clearly was not a normal airplane, but it looked like an airplane.
Mm.
The other thing is, the fact that you were flooded and the power was out, that puts the base in kind of a liminal point right there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no one's there. Like, besides maybe, on the entire base, probably like 50 people, and this is a big base, so no one went to work, because it was flooded.
Yeah.
And it's New Year's Eve too, like no one's going to be there.
Another liminal point.
Yeah. So if, say it was the government, which I don't know how that could even make sense, but say it would be a great time to land your plane, experimental plane in the trees, I guess, because no one's there and no one's going to believe them,
Right.
So it's like, oh, well, this is the best time, I guess. But it's like, it just doesn't, none of it makes any sense.
I would think more if they were going to do something like that, it would be projections.
Right.
Rather than actual craft.
Right.
Because you could see that being a hologram above you, potentially.
Right.
See through it. Kind of, if you said, well, it's a hologram, it kind of fits what you described, but it doesn't mean it was.
Right. The other idea, is that that's what my brain saw as the object, but it wasn't that, and it didn't look anything remotely close to that thing. And it's just, again, this image going into my brain, through my eyes, where it doesn't look remotely close to that. It actually looks totally different. Makes sense, in some way. But that's what I hallucinate, and other people do too, because they're similar as to me.
Right. Or it picks, our brains pick a form for something it has no reference point for. And
exactly.
And there may be an interaction there where that thing then says, okay, that's what I am,
Yeah, exactly. And so, that's pretty much my two main experiences with waking experiences with UFOs. But I've had a lot of encounters, dreams, in hypnagogia and stuff like that. And I'd be glad to kind of talk about some of those.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, those ones really interest me the most, I think, because I'm so interested in sleep and dreams already, but also like similarities to other people that have those experiences too, and also like shamanistic. Initiations. For shamans, it's like they describe very similar patterns of experiences in their stories, and through anthropologists taking down their stories and stuff and translating them. Essentially, shaman, one of the main ways of initiation is to be either pulled up into the sky or pulled down into the earth and taken apart, like either physically broken into pieces and then put back together, or have objects, they call them stones, and jewels inserted into their body, and then as they're put back together. So, if I'm a modern person, it's very likely that these, we would describe it as, somebody putting metal pieces into us, like technology of some kind, and reassembling us and putting down, and that's what we call an alien abduction, And obviously there's people that have it when they're awake too, you know.
But also when they take implants out, they are kind of just like generally solid things. They're not necessarily technology usually.
Yeah, I haven't really I haven't looked at the physical aspect of it, but that would be very interesting to read about what people have had removed from them, and the objects, what they look like. Maybe it's a solid piece of metal or something. I've never really heard about that, so that's fascinating.
Yeah, they have removed some. I know Whitley Strieber's moved when they tried to remove it.
Huh.
But, I mean, for most of them, I think when they take them out, they are not anything like alien necessarily. They're just no good explanation of how come they're there.
Interesting. Yeah, and that, could be, again, this image, we're seeing something different than what it actually looks like to, say, these beings or whatever they are. So, I mean, I found those really fascinating because I've had encounters with alien-like beings and also abduction-type experiences in sleep paralysis, and I've read also people going to sleep labs and stuff that have continual alien-type abductions, and they watch them in the lab, and they've realized that these people, they explain it away saying, oh, well, they're having sleep paralysis, they're asleep, so obviously they're not being abducted,
Yeah.
I don't typically I don't think that's the end of the story, because I've had these experiences. So,
Right.
But a common experience for me is essentially, UFOs outside my window or something like that, and I'm terrified. As a kid, that was pretty common. Another one is essentially UFOs or aliens, sorry, taking me up like like three of them essentially on all corners of me, triangle around me, and then me kind of floating up in a spiral action with them, essentially molesting me as I get pulled up into the sky, which is for me at that point in my life, I've had so many sleep paralysis type experiences with kind of related to sexual activity and stuff like that being raped by aliens isn't the worst thing I've experienced. So I didn't really react horribly to that or anything. I was just like, okay, I'll just go with it.
Right.
And which is probably not normal for most people, but I tend to think of sleep paralysis and hypnagogia as a positive thing versus a negative thing. And use it as kind of a tool for healing and encountering these type of experiences. But the most interesting one happened for a series of months in my old house that I was in, where I'd wake up in my bed and I'd look over the corner of my room, and there was always not always, but pretty often a typical alien. It's like the gray, kind of big-headed alien-looking being.
Mm-hmm.
Big eyes and all that, and it's not doing anything. So I just tried to communicate with it in any way I could, and we really never communicated that I know of. I just commonly, one time I stuck my face in its mouth, try to put my ear right next to its mouth because I couldn't hear what it was saying, and or at least what looked like a mouth,
Yeah.
And it was just like gumbling, grumbled sound, and I was like, okay, I can't understand anything this thing's saying. But this happened for a long time, and I kind of gave up trying to communicate to it, and eventually I have this stone orb thing that my mom gave me years prior, and I always kept it next to my bed for some reason. And in this this dream space, it picked up my object, and it took off in the front of the house, and it took off, and it left the door open, and then it never came back. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that's about, but left me alone, and I've had encounters in hypnagogia where I'm asleep in the room with my wife, and I hear people talking in another room, and they're talking about me and my wife sleeping in the bed, and I get the sense that they're not human, they're alien-like,
Right.
and they definitely, they're not, they weren't negative or anything like that. They were just having a conversation about me and my wife while we were sleeping, and I thought that was kind of strange. And the other one that really comes to memory is this shamanistic type initiation experience. And it's not really, I wouldn't say it's related to aliens necessarily, but these are multi-layered type symbolic dreams. Essentially, I wanted to see what like the initiation type experience was like, that I've read about so much with people, other people's experiences. So I was like, well, I'd be open to that, like see what that's like. And so I set the intention to have an experience like that. I was like, I'm willing to have that experience and see what it's like. And so I went to sleep, and sure enough, in the dream I came out of my body, and there was a guy, and he was an African American dude, and he's like, "Hey, we've been waiting for you. Are you ready?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm ready." I knew exactly what he wanted me to do, and he put me on this like ski lift of all things, and so I go on the ski lift, and suddenly I'm transported to this old house, and it's like kind of broken down, like trailer park kind of like house,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what is going on here? It's like the lights are off, and there's like a kitchen in front of me, and suddenly I see this guy. He's a giant, just giant white guy. I expected like South American shaman or something,
Right.
And he's just this giant white guy, like maybe Nordic, you'd imagine like something you see in the movies, like just huge man, and he's got tattoos on him and stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, like what is going on? And he just looks at me, and I'm paralyzed, I can't move, and he like telepathically lays me down horizontally, so I'm on my back, and he like moves me into this other room, and he takes out this giant ceremonial type knife, and he starts cutting pieces of my body off, like my legs and my arms, and then he comes up to my head and he starts sawing my head off, and I can feel like everything. It's not super painful, but very uncomfortable and awkward.
Yeah.
And
he's taking your head off. It's a little awkward.
Yeah. I mean, I can feel the blades just cutting through my skin, each layer, and I was just like, oh no. And then it's kind of silence, after my head gets cut off. Nothing really happens. And then I get kind of reassembled, and then I wake up, and that was it. And I was like, well, I don't know what that meant, but I did it, I guess. So, and I saw him again in another dream, not too long after. And he was in a movie theater with me in the dream, and he was just really he doesn't look very happy at me. And that's the time in my life I was kind of like, okay, I need to take a break from like trying to force these events from happening, like
Right.
I need to step back and say, hey, everything has its time, and I'm obviously not ready for some of this stuff. So it really kind of woke me up and said, all right, time to let off a little bit. So I haven't seen him since, thankfully. But it was definitely one of the top dreams, the sawing of my body.
Yeah. And I mean, so was it a very lucid dream, or?
Oh yeah. I mean, during these dreams, I'm out of my body. I feel it's as real as it can be in waking reality, if not more real.
Yeah.
I mean, in these states, I'm so confused, even that if I'm awake or not. Like, I'll come out of my body and I'll think that I'm awake, and I obviously don't want to go running around my room pissing my wife off because she's trying to sleep. So I'll do like jumping jacks or something like that, to test the environment. And sometimes I float, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'm obviously dreaming right now. So, but it's so realistic that I typically can't tell the difference. And it's hyper realistic. I used to call them super lucid dreams, because in a lucid dream, sometimes you can break like the reality of the dream, and these out-of-body experiences are so realistic that they generally fail like reality checks in the dream, like flipping lights on and off. The lights will work perfectly fine. The clocks will work perfectly fine, and it's like, okay, what is going on here? Am I actually asleep? I have no idea. So it takes a lot of kind of self-awareness to be able to figure out that you're actually asleep. And it's common for people to actually have like lucid type dreams where they wake up, they think they're actually awake, so they go to the bathroom or they do whatever they normally do to get ready for the day, and then they wake up again and they're like, oh gosh, like I thought I was awake the whole time,
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
Oh, I got that really taxing thing done. Okay, good. And then you wake
then
up.
You gotta go through it again. That's the worst. So, but it's, since those experiences, my understanding of symbolism, dream meaning, things like that have drastically changed to the point where I'm starting to finally be able to grasp some of that stuff and work through it and come back to those experiences again through my memory and through my waking life and dreams, and kind of re-encounter all that stuff again to really understand and get into it and embrace it,
And you got to wonder, I mean, our brains do work on a symbolic level, but with the advent of like writing and things like that, it's kind of changed the way our brains process symbols. And like, I've heard it said before that we look at it like, oh, these cultures weren't advanced enough to have writing, but they may have understood things better than the cultures who have writing because they were able to think in a more symbolic form.
Right. Yeah. Anymore, if any of my friends talk to me, I tell them symbols are the most important thing that you can ever study. Not so much in that universal meaning of symbols and things like that, which people typically think of them as. What I hope that people do is they study symbols so that they can understand what a symbol is. Through studying symbols, you start realizing that they're not just an object, that you see with your eyes. They're essentially tulpas. So
yeah,
if you understand what a tulpa is, they're mental forms that have consciousness that exist outside yourself, right? And symbols contain consciousness, and according to what I study anyways. And so a symbol isn't just a image that you see with your eyes. Symbols are everything, and that's how we engage with reality. You don't necessarily even have to believe that or accept that, I guess. You could say symbols are the way that we see reality, and they're representations of things. So, say, I'm drinking out of a cup of water. Well, I know what the cup of water is because I know through my past and all the experiences I've had with cups and water that I know that that's a cup of water. But that's not really what I'm experiencing. I'm experiencing much more than what is represented by the cup of water. Like there's a chemical component to that. There's a electrical magnetic component to that, and so on. And everything comes to a form of a image that I'm in the physical senses that I'm experiencing with that cup of water, so that it represents that. But if I was to limit a cup of water to just a cup of water and say, well, that's it, then I would be doing it a disservice,
Yeah.
A good example is like people, we like to put people in boxes and define them based on the image or what we think of those people, but really though, you can't really know anyone
Right.
past what you know of them, right? So people are constantly changing. There's like 100 trillion neurons in somebody's brain, and there's more cells obviously than that, and they're constantly changing, and their emotions are changing, and their ideas are changing. So it's like I can't really limit that person to say, oh well, I know, blah blah blah. I don't really know them. I represent them symbolically by what I think is them, and that comes in an image form and my senses of them, things like that. But there's so much more to them. So the same thing goes with these experiences and dreams and these altered states, and also all reality is so dreamlike because it's so on another level. It's so malleable and so deep that it is infinitely deep. Each object. Yeah. And so we encounter those things symbolically so that we can engage with it on some level. And then some objects, like say a UFO, right? It's so different than what we typically have in our psyche that we can't really represent it clearly in our minds. So we symbolically, may, and this is the best explanation that I can come to, and I think you would agree, is like we put that into an image that makes sense to us, at least enough that we can engage with it on some level. Sometimes it's so weird that we can't even engage with it, and our brains is like, I need to dump this file out, because I can't even comprehend it.
Yeah, there could be, I've speculated there could be wandering bits of consciousness that we occasionally encounter, and most people wouldn't even notice them. But then if someone does notice it, especially if you're in a remote area or something like that, and it comes into your awareness, your brain goes, what the hell is that? What do I do with that? And then eventually it just goes, it must be a monster. It's a monster. That's what it is,
Exactly, man. We don't know what it is, Growing up, I kind of goes into the UFO and all that stuff with my life. It's like I lived in this house that it gave me the creeps. Like, there's no other way of putting it. Like, this house, every moment I lived in that house growing up as a child, like, I was absolutely creeped out. Like, I couldn't even go into the house without turning on the lights if it was dark, and I was always in the light. I never left the light off. I would have nightmares of the lights just turning off. It was terrifying to me, like creepy, terrifying. And growing up, I thought, I'm just I'm just scared of the dark. That's just how it is for me. So I went to college, and suddenly my fear of the dark just completely vanished. And I was like, what is going on here? And so then I spent the year at school, and I came back in the winter time for holiday, and I brought a guy from Sri Lanka with me because he couldn't go home. He was in Idaho, right? And it's a long trip, So I was like, hey, dude, you can spend the week with me at my house. No one's there. It's just me and you. You can do whatever you want, chill out. He's like, okay. So he was, we had a great time. But every single night, I'd walk by his room, and he'd have his light on. And I was like, I'll just go turn it off for him, So I go in his room when he's sleeping and just turn his light off. It's kind of creepy of me, but I didn't think much of it. And, this happened the whole entire time. And I didn't really think anything of it because I wasn't putting, I've lived there all my life, so I didn't really think of it anymore. But I slept with my light on. Too,
right.
It's normal. And so I went back to school, we're telling ghost stories or whatever. I'm like, I always thought somebody died in my house, like fell down the stairs, because I lived underneath the stairs kind of, like my room's to the side of the stairs. And he's like, you should have told me that. And I was like, well, why, dude? Like, what? And he's like, I left the light on every single night because I thought somebody was staring at me, And that's exactly the feeling that I had every single night in my childhood. Like somebody just right over you, just staring right at your face, like as you're trying to sleep, you're just like, oh my gosh, like that's the most awkward feeling I've ever had in my life. And then years later, I talked to a childhood friend. We kind of separated and then came back together and started talking about memories and stuff. And I was like, dude, you ever have any weird feelings at my house? And he's like, yeah, I never wanted to tell you because, you're my friend and I wanted to spend time with you. And he's like, your house creeped me the hell out. And he's like, anytime that I was in there, I felt like somebody was watching me the entire time. And it just gave me the worst feeling ever, And I'm like, yeah, dude, me too. And so I asked, I asked my brother, he's my stepbrother. I was like, hey man, you ever feel any weird stuff in the house? He's like, no, never had a feeling. I'm like, what the heck, and now, because I know what that feeling feels like, and I've had it so long, I really know what that feeling feels like. I get that feeling when I encounter things in sleep paralysis, like even if I'm in a dream and I get that feeling, I know that I'm going to have sleep paralysis.
Right.
And it's like a dread like feeling. And sometimes, I get that feeling in my house, pretty much anywhere. I get that feeling sometimes. It's very rare. And, I just honestly, I think, that something's probably there. I don't know what it is. Obviously, I don't want it there because it's not a good feeling. And I just kind of either ignore it or I use some sage and it goes away, Yeah. I never see it. I don't know what it looks like. I've seen things in sleep paralysis, obviously, that have visual looks to them and stuff and seem very real, but I've never encountered things with my eyes open like that. So I just get the feeling, and that's enough for me,
Right. I wonder, though, if your house had weird EM interference in it.
Right. Oh, well, that house had the worst electrical wiring. I mean, it was an old house, and it was put together, very poorly, I'd imagine.
Right.
So
right.
The wiring in there was a disaster. So it very well could have been a wiring issue, and that's very possible. In my current house, it's new, and I can tell you that I don't get the feeling all the time.
Right.
I only get it every once in a while, and it passes without me doing anything. I don't unplug anything. I'm not turning lights on and off, nothing like that. It comes, and I light some sage, go to the rooms, and then it's gone. So I don't know.
I have distinctly heard people walk into my bedroom after I turned the light off. And it especially happened when I decided to write a book about all my basically an autobiography. And all of a sudden, every night I turned the light off, and a few moments later, I'd hear somebody walk into the room. Like there's a creak in a particular part of the door, and I'd hear that creak and footsteps, and they'd stop next to the bed. Like they were looking at me, and every time I turn on the light, and of course there was nothing there. And finally I said, I know not to write about everything. And then it stopped.
Oh, nice. Well, I'll tell you this, like I recently started working with the neurologist doing EEGs. So I conduct the EEGs, and I get a good about 2 hours with each patient. And a lot of these people are pretty old. I'd say on average, they're probably 75 plus in age. And so they're getting nearer to the end, right? And some of them are a lot older than that. So they're pretty frail. And they also are there for neurological issues. One lady I encountered, she came in for visual hallucinations. And so I started asking her about, I'm like, well, what brought you in, and she was talking about her hallucinations and stuff, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And she sees dead people, and I was like, well, what have you done to try to get rid of them? I'm just talking to her as a person.
Yeah.
And she says, well, at first they really bothered me, and I was like, okay. And she's like, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll just ask them to leave, and I was like, okay. And she's like, at first they were really resistant to leaving. I told them, hey, this is my room. You need to go away. Like this is my time to sleep. And at first they were kind of resistant to leaving. And now she says, after me telling them this a few times, they leave pretty easily now. So I'm like, well, that's interesting. Obviously the doctor's trying to get to the bottom of it, and her EEG was normal. So, there's nothing that I could prove abnormal with her. But in talking to her about her life experiences and some of her ailments, that she has, I realized that I'm very similar to her and some other people that kind of have those experiences later in life. Obviously I'm a lot younger than her, so
yeah.
But so that's a little frightening. It's like, oh, okay, what's that mean about me? But but at the same time, I'm like, I can have empathy for her. I can have some compassion because I know what she's feeling. I can't see the things that she sees, but I know how real they are to her, and what works. Like, if she tells them to leave, say they're not real, I think they're real, but say they're not real and they leave, well, that's pretty good technique,
Yes,
like no medication required,
Whether
So
they're
that's a
real
win.
or not real, if that works, great.
Right, exactly. So, it's like you use what works, So I use sage, because for whatever reason it works. So,
Yeah.
and maybe it's the power of the symbol of sage and my belief in it,
Right,
the
right.
mental image of the sage and all that amplifies my imagination to push it out of the reality or whatever. I don't know, but it works, regardless.
Well,
So,
I feel like our unconscious does play some part in creating our reality. I
yes.
mean, there is mind over matter, but I think there is a very intricate interplay, not necessarily with our conscious mind, but our unconscious mind, which of course works in the language of symbols. And I think that's how magic works.
Mhm.
You do symbolic stuff in magic and it gets down to that deeper level that then affects reality. So, I mean, the key to all of that is symbolism. You're not doing it with language.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's what ancient rituals were,
Yeah.
For them it worked, right? They don't need the 150 page dissertation talking about why the ritual of dancing around a fire works, or
Right.
whatever. They just do it because they've done it forever. They've done it since the beginning of their history, and it works.
Right.
But we can explain it, try to explain it why it works and everything. But in today's world, we discredit symbolism, we discredit dreams, we discredit rituals, things like that. But what we don't realize that every aspect of our life is essentially ritualistic, and that it's important for us to create ritual, and ritual type actions, and build a symbolic understanding of reality, so that we can engage with it properly, because that's what we're meant to do as humans.
Yeah.
So in today's world, we have we still do ritual. We just don't understand why, and we don't know what ritual we're doing.
Yeah.
It may be a ritual for somebody else, and that is actually what is happening for a lot of our things that we like, in reality. So, like, say the Apple, community, they're very ritualistic in how they go about using their computers and their gear and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
And there's kind of like a cult-like mindset around the technology of Apple computers and stuff, and the phones and all that, So there's very much a ritual and symbolic language being played out there. However, it's kind of contributing to the Apple community, not so much the growth of the individual.
Yeah.
So most of my studying and practice in life is essentially to create ritual that will most support me in growing me as a human being, versus trying to give up, my energy and power through symbolic ritual to somebody else.
Yes. Yes.
So
Exactly.
I've gone about reducing the time that I watch TV and engage with that kind of material, because and you don't really have to go down to like the esoteric road in order to find this. It's very blatantly present in like marketing and manipulation of using manipulation to market to people, and subliminal messaging and things like that. So
Yep.
it's a technique used by marketers since I think the early 40s. So might want to pay attention to some of that.
And that's the thing. They've gotten so good at that type of manipulation. It's ridiculous.
Oh yeah. I mean, like I I use Head and Shoulders because I have like this horrible dandruff problem if I don't. So I like to look like a normal human being sometimes, and so I'm in the shower looking at this this symbol, the Head and Shoulders symbol, and I'm like, wow, that's an Ouroboros, and I really like the Ouroboros in my life. It's a very active symbol that I've experienced in life. But I was like, oh, that's interesting. And if you start paying attention to these symbols, you can kind of start seeing them kind of everywhere, slightly modified in some spaces to kind of hide. And it's not necessarily like intentionally done either. I don't think, it may be accidental in the sense that somebody uses a symbol because they know it's like it connects to people and they feel like it connects to them. So then they put it on their product, and then next thing you know, the product, becomes popular and so on, and the rest is history. But I wouldn't put it past marketers who may actually really understand symbology to kind of use symbols in order to manipulate human consciousness to better support their product, So Apple's very good at that. I'm always impressed by Apple computers and their use of like design and symbology because that's a lot of what kind of represents their community. Like Steve Jobs was very interested in like fonts, typeface and stuff like that.
Yeah.
At a young age, so he really understood like the design importance of letters. Maybe not so much like symbols themselves, but he definitely understood the importance of graphical interfaces and using symbolic text in order to invoke emotion and stuff like that and creativity in people. So that's why the Apple computers, I think, were primarily used for creativity, because of that. So well, Microsoft not so much,
Yeah, and I mean the thing I realized a while ago about Apple is that a lot of their stuff is not necessarily better, but it is marketed so much better. Mm-hmm. Other companies might do this or that better than Apple and probably came up with it before Apple, but Apple knew how to capitalize on it and really market it properly to get to people.
Mm-hmm. Well, marketing is another word for symbolic manipulation.
Yeah.
So symbols don't necessarily have to be images; they can be words. And also spoken words. The feeling that you may get from something, emotionally, those are all symbolic. People tend to limit symbols to images, and that would be a grave mistake. So.
Yeah, but I always just thought, I'm not that much of an Apple fan, but I think their marketing and the way they go about stuff is brilliant. I mean, it's like perfection in that area. Yeah.
I highly recommend to the listeners to look up Century of the Self if they haven't watched that documentary yet. It's like a older PBS, I think, documentary. It's free on the internet, surprisingly still available. But it kind of walks people through the history of marketing and how it came around, and also consumerism and where that came. And it really goes into depth of like, before the late 40s, essentially products were marketed by their usefulness,
right,
and how long it would last and like what it would actually do for you. And then it changed to like essentially symbolic representation and also how it makes you feel. So it really grasped onto that emotional aspect of people versus like the utility of it. And there's like kind of a dark history to that too, because it was useful for the Nazis. And so they, I can't remember correctly if they hired the same guy that marketed the Nazi propaganda, but I believe so. And into the U.S. after the war.
Yeah, well, they did a lot of that.
Yeah. So it's not past my expectations of the U.S. to steal some Nazi propaganda experts and then start using on American population. But essentially, fast forward, and that's where we're at. We're a consumer-based culture where the utility of an object isn't actually as important as how cool we look and feel about it.
Yes. And that's something frustrating to me, because I'll see a commercial and I'll be like, just tell me what I need to know about this. Like I don't want all this other, fancy propaganda around it. I just want to know what it does. Why is this something I need?
Yeah. I mean, some of those, I watched some of these commercials. I'm just like, wow, that was an amazing experience, but I have no clue what you're trying to sell me,
Exactly.
But it's in there somewhere,
And that's the whole viral marketing thing, where they give you something interesting to latch onto, like, oh, what's this? And now you're paying attention, and finally they can be like, go see this movie, and
Yeah, exactly. So one a good person that I would highly recommend to people to kind of unlock their minds about symbolism and in relationship to culture and stuff is Jonathan Pajou. He's a friend with Jordan Peterson, kind of, and so they kind of operate in the same world, kind of. But Jonathan Pajou I think he's an Orthodox Christian, but he does an amazing job in going through some of the mainstream cultural symbolic images and kind of going through some of those and picking them apart and talking about some of the ancient meanings to that, or also where those images come from and where they're going with them, and try to analyze it in a deeper way than typically people do. I think it's still kind of surface level to where I would like to go with symbols. I'm deep in there, I think.
Right.
But it was a great starting point for me to get there. And also Jung's work on symbolism is obviously something that's important to me, because it not necessarily that Jung fully understood what symbols are, because what I'm proposing is essentially you can never really understand what a symbol totally means, right? But you're trying to engage with it. But he does a very good job in touching and brushing on this idea that symbols are much more than what meets the eye.
Yes. Yeah.
Joseph Campbell, obviously, he's a myth expert, and he talks about his primary thing was like the hero's journey and these patterns that he experienced through all these different myths and the importance of myth and symbols in myth. He's an amazing person in that area. And there's actually, I don't know if it's still on Netflix, but there's like a series that he put on about the hero's journey and myth, and he actually is in the
Lucasfilm,
yeah, he's in the Lucas. It's like the Lucas Ranch, I think.
Yep.
And he's talking about it. He was friends with George Lucas and inspired some of the images and symbology that's located in Star Wars.
Yeah, well, he always said Star Wars was a good example of a modern myth.
Right, yeah. And, it goes back to Jung with the UFOs, talking about UFOs being a modern myth, and I could see that, it's like UFOs kind of make this space where we don't know what it is, so we're allowed to kind of project onto the images of the UFOs and the images of these encounters of aliens and such to kind of make meaning into it, to put meaning into it. And also, those objects are real in the sense that we experience them. So they communicate to us, through this symbolic relationship. It's like a two-way communication. So even though we may not understand the language of the UFOs or the aliens, right, or beings that we may encounter or whatever, there is still communication occurring. And I imagine that some people have a better understanding of that communication than some, So
right.
I have a pretty poor understanding, even though I'm trying my hardest. So
we're just about out of time. Are you up for doing a Patreon segment?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So where can people find your stuff?
They can go to luciddreambook.com and just go there, and there's a link, or that takes you directly to my book page, which is actually on taileaters.com.
Okay.
And
there's the Ouroboros again.
Yeah, and they can go to there's a lot of stuff on that website for blog posts and stuff about consciousness, dreams, and you name it, psychedelics, so on, and just random weirdness. But I try to keep it like as more scientific, than far out stuff,
Yeah.
But I think there's pretty good, well-written articles on there, and they're free. But the book's on there. They can buy it straight through my website, and they get a signed copy, and also, a unique necklace that I made that symbolically represents kind of like the journey in the book. So that's kind of cool. Or they can go to Amazon and buy it through there, and they can also go to Inner Traditions and buy it there, and it's available pretty much anywhere, I think, right now. So
Awesome. All right, so we'll continue talking in a Patreon segment.
All right. Sounds good.
And I want to thank all of my patrons right now for their support. And without you, I don't know if this show would exist. And I want to give an extra special shout out to those pledging $10 or more. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Eric Hervin, Tim, The 100th Monkey Project, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, Alfred Tuttle, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Chris Ernst, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, David Moore, Denise Sarek, Diane B., Dominic O'Malley, Edu Camahort, MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, Joanna Rojas, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Kristen L., Layla Malden, Shane B., Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Matt in Delaware, Matthew Sproul, Maddie, Nagatha Christie, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Roger Gonzalez, Sam Sharon, Sedgder, Stone Wilderness, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, 36 Dingo, Vincent Treewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, William Lovelace, Red Collier, and Stephen D. Thank you all so very, very much. As we said at the end of the episode, there's a Patreon segment with Lee that may actually be longer than the show. But, yeah, if you're a patron, you'll get that later in the week. It's only $3 to become a patron. It helps us out greatly. So if you like the show and you can afford $3 a month, please support us on Patreon. You can also give us donations and stuff. All of this stuff is at the website, wheredidtheroadgo.com. There's also merch and, a full archive of every show we've ever done on the website. I have a couple of midweek shows that will be coming up soon, and trying to get more than one show a week done here when possible, plus the extra Patreon content as well. And hypothetically, I will be appearing at the Strange Realities Conference this year. It's October 15th, 16th, and 17th in Nashville. You can go to strangerealitiesconference.com for more information. Chris Ernst will be there. Ren will be there. A bunch of people from Where Did the Road Go that you hear regularly will be there. Joshua Cutchin, Michael Hughes. But go to the website for a full list of who's going to be there. So assuming things don't lock down again prior to October, the plan is for me to be there live. So that'll be pretty fun. I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.